In the last two videos, we understood the basics of API gateway and proxy. We also realized how runtime agent channelizes the application policies on top of the API implementation. With the API policies, we could easily implement non-functional requirement via the API gateway. Although Mule provides wide range of out-of-the-box policies, there could be situations where we might need custom policies. Let's understand a few scenarios. We have an API implementation and a gateway on top of it where policies are applied. Suppose your organization has a database with user credentials and wants to use it for authentication and authorization purpose instead of the client ID enforcement. Or you have an e-commerce API where you often do seasonal promotions. Or you might have a content delivery API and want to channelize ads to your customer based on their membership. Such use cases call out for the development of a custom policies. By creating custom policies, we can implement frequently occurring temporary changes instantly. So the use case that I'll be demonstrating is of a web streaming platform which returns a detail of available show and a few promotional content. Now we want to hide this promotional content from our premium members, and for that we will be creating a custom policy so that the API implementation layer is left undisturbed. We will be using a Maven archetype to create a base project and then make changes to it. Since the archetype is not available on the public repository of Maven, we need to make a few changes to the settings.xml. In the settings.xml, observe the archetype repository is pointing towards the MuleSoft repository. Apart from this, you would also need to add a server which has your Anypoint platform credentials. If you also observe, I have added another profile called Mule, and it has the repository details which are not public. So for creating the archetype, only this profile is enough. But when you go to the build and deploy phase of your policy, you would need to set up your Anypoint platform credential as well as point it to the MuleSoft repository. The reason behind this is that there are a few dependencies which are only available for the paid subscription. They do not come with the free subscription or the community version. So now that you have your settings.xml ready, you can create this archetype command. So this Maven archetype command has the group ID of the archetype, the artifact ID and the version. What we need to add is the group ID. Here the group ID will be the organization ID. So to get the organization ID, you can simply log into your Anypoint platform, and inside the URL you can see the organization ID. All you have to do is copy and paste it. Next, add the artifact ID. I've named it as ads delivery. Add a version and package it as a Mule policy. So let's just copy this and open a CMD. And let's run this command. So it will ask a few questions like the description of your policy. So let's wait for the prompt. Okay, so now it's asking for the policy description. Policy to restrict ads based on subscription. Alright, next is value for policy name. I'll name it as ads delivery. Everything looks fine. Let's hit yes. Alright, the build is succeeded. So let's close the command prompt. Now let's see the structure. So if you can see, it has a POM, it has an ads delivery YAML, then in the src folder it has a template.xml. So these are the two main files, the template XML and the ads delivery.yaml. This is where all the things are done. The ads delivery.yaml will have all the details that would be rendered on the API manager UI, whereas the template.xml will have the core logic on which the custom policy will work. So I've imported the project into the Anypoint Studio. There are 4 main files that we'll be working with. The template.xml will have the code implementation. The ads delivery.yaml file, that is the policy definition file, will dictate what renders on the UI in API manager. The Mule artifact.json tells the minimum Mule version that has to be used, and the pom.xml has all the dependencies and build deploy configuration. So let's start with the pom.xml. In the pom.xml, there is a group ID that we mentioned while creating the base project. The artifact ID is same that we had mentioned, and the version. Now the packaging is Mule policy as opposed to a Mule application and a Mule extension in case of a custom connector. These are a few properties that will be used further. One thing to notice, the exchange URL is the same as the organization ID, meaning the final jar and the policy definition that are generated gets uploaded to your API, to the exchange. Moving ahead to the dependencies section, we have Mule HTTP policy transform extension. This helps in modifying the headers and the payload that is being returned to the end user. So in our case, we will be getting a response from the API implementation, and that would be sent back to the user. Coming to the build part. In the build part, if we observe, we have an execution which is called as upload template. So this execution will package the YAML file which dictates what has to be rendered on the UI. We'll package it and upload it to the API exchange. So if we say, we can understand that there are 2 parts to the deployment. One part involves the packaging of a policy definition, which is your YAML file, and the other part is the jar file, which will have the template.xml, which has the actual implementation. So 2 things get uploaded. One is the policy definition and one is the actual jar, which is the policy jar. Other thing to notice, that the repository ID should be the same as the server name that we have in settings.xml. For example, in our case, I have it named as CloudHub, so the same should be present over there. So this will help it to publish it to the Anypoint platform using your credentials configured in the settings.xml, and the same has to be added over here. So let's just change it. It's not Exchange server, but it's CloudHub in my case. So I've changed it to CloudHub, and the same over here. Alright, so the pom.xml is good and we need not make any other changes to this file. Now let's see the Mule artifact.json. It has only min Mule version. You can also add a few properties which you want to mask over here, like Anypoint platform, client ID and client secret. so those also can be added in if required. Well, in our case we don't require them. Then we have the ads delivery.yaml. So this is the policy definition file which shows what has to be rendered on the UI. ID is a mandatory field and it should be unique throughout the organization in which you intend to deploy the policy. In our case it's ads delivery. Name is a user-friendly name that appears in the list of policies in the API manager. Description is obvious. Category helps to group the policies into one, and again it will be visible in the API manager when multiple APIs fall under a single category, so that helps in better grouping of the policies. Type denotes the value used by Edge to show metrics about different type of policy violations. Resource level supported denotes that the policy can be applied to the resource level point cuts. Encryption supported, it's kept as false because I don't want any encryption in this policy. You can set it as true when required. Standalone means if the policy can work on its own, set it to true. If it depends on other policy for its functioning, set it as false. So now if you set the standalone as false, that means that it needs some other policies. So to define those prerequisite policies, those can be defined inside the array called required characteristic. And in the same line there is provided characteristics, which is used to prevent clashes between two similar policies. And the last section is the configuration array. So the configuration array is where you define your custom properties, like creating checkbox, radio buttons, and then getting the inputs for configuring your API policy. So depending upon my use case, in the configuration I have added two elements, promotional content and promotional content condition. Now to visualize this, you can think of a checkbox called promotional content, which when checked up opens a new expression where you can specify what is the condition to modify the data. Like in our example, we will be looking for a membership key in the header, so the developer can add an expression in the promotional content condition to get the value for the membership key in the header. So if we see the promotional content property, it has name field. So this is the field that appears in the API manager. Description, as it is obvious, it tells you what is the data expected. Or then we have type. Since the type is boolean, it occurs as a checkbox. Optional, it's obvious, I have set it to true. If you want you can, otherwise there's no need to set this. Default value is false, so by default it's unchecked. Now let's come to the promotional content condition. Again, name and description same. Type is expression as opposed to boolean, because we want to put some data view expression into it to fetch the header named as membership. Optional is set to true. Sensitive is set to false. Sensitive when you want the expression, whatever is written inside the box, it has to be masked. So in that case you can set it to true, but we'll be entering just plain data view expression, so that is set to false. Now depends on key and depends on value. Depends on key is promotional content, so unless and until you check the promotional content checkbox, this won't appear. So it depends on promotional content. Once it is checked, it appears, and it depends on the value of that key. So this is how our policy definition looks like, and the same thing will be rendered on the API manager when someone tries to configure this policy. Now let's come to the main section, which is the template.xml, where our actual logic will be implemented. So a point to note over here is the drag and drop functionality won't work because the XML is slightly different, and we just can't use the drag and drop functionality. All the namespaces also are different, but it's if you look at the XML of a normal Mule flow, it looks quite similar. So let's understand the template.xml. The template.xml is quite similar to a normal Mule flow.xml. One important concept to understand here is the 3 curly braces. These are known as handlebars. Handlebars is a templating engine by Mustache, whose job is to evaluate values from the policy definition file appearing in the UI, and also to render XML elements. So we'll be using this handlebars in the development of the logic. Apart from this, everything falls under the HTTP policy source. There is an element called HTTP policy execute next. So any piece of code that you write before this element will be executed prior to the control reaching to the API implementation, and anything being written after this will be coming into picture once the response comes back from the API implementation. So the default file does nothing but makes the payload as hello world and adds a new header called new header key and value as hello world. So what we'll be doing is we'll be adding some code for our policy to work. Like in our case, we have a promotional content, right? This is the property that we have, which decides if the logic should be applied or not. So what am I going to do is, at the beginning I'll add a logic to evaluate this value. So here I'll be using handlebar. So this is a 2 brace handlebar. I'll tell you what does this do. I'll use an if condition. So this is how we write if condition promotional content, and then I'll close this if statement. Alright, so the difference between 2 braces handlebar and 3 braces handlebar is, when you want to get the value, actual value, you use a 3 braces, and if you want to use some logical condition or operator, you use the 2 braces. Like in this case we are using if with the value of promotional content, so we use the one with 2 braces. But in this case we want the policy ID that has created in the runtime or in the API manager, so we use the policy ID with 3 braces. So that's the difference. So what I'll do is I'll set a variable. So I'll write as set variable name equal to enable promotional. So I've set the variable enable promotional content with the value promotional content condition. So if you can see, I have added 3 braces handlebars, and this will get the value of promotional content condition from the API manager, and it is a checkbox, so it will be either true or false. So depending upon the value of this set variable, I want to add some logic. So before that, what I'll do is I'll add another set variable to get a copy of payload. So let's just copy the same thing and get the payload. So I'm intentionally adding this set variable to explain one small concept over here, that just let me just add this. I'll name this variable as content and the value as payload. So if you write any payload within the handlebars, that turns out to be a different payload. That is the one that would come from the policy definition, that is in the expression box. If you write any expression and that generates some payload, so that thing would appear in this payload. So that won't be the payload that is coming from the API implementation. So in our case, we are looking at the payload coming from the API implementation, so it's good to add that payload in the data view expression. So this one will give the payload that is coming back from the API implementation, whereas the payload having 3 curly braces will give the one that is coming from the policy definition. So I have added the payload into a content variable. Now I already have okay, I made a mistake. I need not add this in HTTP transform. This would give error, but instead it has to be after the execute next, because the payload will come once the API implementation gets executed. So this part is before the API implementation and this part is after the API implementation call finishes. Alright, so HTTP transform, this helps to transform the HTTP response that we are sending. So in the body, I don't want to send this hello world. Instead, what the approach that we followed was, we'll get a JSON. Let's quickly have a look at that JSON. So we have this JSON, and in this JSON we are looking to eliminate the promotional content, right? So this is the promotional content and we want to remove this depending on the condition. If the customer is a premium customer, that is a subscription is premium, then remove this, and if it's not premium, then keep it as it is, meaning don't do any changes to the payload. So how do we implement it? Let's use a basic data view transform. So what am I going to do is, I'll output it as application JSON. Let's name the output as application JSON, 3 bars. Now let's add an if condition. If where's dot, now if the enable promotional content is on, depending on this condition, what we are going to do is, all right, we are returning where's dot content, meaning if you want to display the promotional content, display the promotional content. Else if you do not want to display the promotional content, what we'll do is where's dot content minus promotional content. All right, so we have the condition ready. Okay, so what we have done over here is, if this flag is enabled, if someone wants to enable the promotional content, it will send as it is without removing the promotional content. But if it is not the case, it will remove the promotional content. But who will tell if it has to do or not? So that thing will be defined at the application policy level, that is in the API manager. In the API manager, in the second element, that is the promotional content condition, will specify, what we'll do is we'll write a data view expression, and in that, if the header is not equal to premium, then automatically this flag will be set it to true. So if it's not a premium, it becomes true, and when it is true, we send the content as it is. When it is false, we remove the promotional content and send back the payload. And in the transform header, it's okay if you don't want any transform headers, but in this case, just to demonstrate, I'll add promo policy and the value as applied. So that's it. We are ready with the basic construct of the policy implementation, and we can now build and deploy this. Now let's do a Maven deploy. I have navigated to the root folder of this project, and I'll open a command prompt and just give a Maven deploy command. As you can see, the build is complete. So now that we have built and deployed the code, let's quickly go to the Exchange and check if it's available. So the ads delivery is available over here. Now let's check. So as you can see, the type is policy, and the asset version that we gave is 1.0.0, and the minimum Mule runtime version which we gave was 4.1.1, and the description that we gave in the YAML file has appeared over here. And using the download option, we can download either the definition file or the jar file of this policy. So now I have opened the API manager, and I already had configured an API. So if I see the API policy tab, I can see the new policy that I created is appearing, and it has the custom type. So remember, in the YAML definition we had entered the custom type, so it has for the grouping purpose it has appeared as custom. So any other APIs with the custom type, those will appear over here. Now let's open this, and if you can see, there is a version 1.0.0 available, and the minimum Mule version is 4.1.1. So now let's try to configure this API policy. So now let's try to apply the policy. So we have the add promotional content checkbox that we had added in the policy definition. So if we enable, it gives an option to add a data view expression. So let's add a data view expression like attributes.headers. So we'll look for subscription. If the subscription is not premium, then we enable the promotional content, and if it is premium, we remove the promotional content. So this is the condition. It will evaluate a true or false, and then the actual XML will do its job of removing the promotional content or keeping it as it is. So now we'll apply this policy. So now the policy has been applied successfully, and we can see in the policy list ads policy coming up, methods, all API methods, and I've applied to all resources. So now, in the interest of time, so that the video doesn't stretch long, I've already deployed the Mule application to CloudHub, and and all the API Autodiscovery has been enabled and the policies have been applied. So now let's try to hit. I have added a subscription header as, let me add as premium, and when I'm adding as premium, I should not see any promotional content. So let's hit the API and see if we are getting the promotional content. No, so we are not getting any promotional content, meaning the API is working as expected. Let's change the subscription to non-premium, and now it should give me the promotional content. Right, so we are getting the promotional content. So in this way we have applied the custom policy we have created, and then we were able to apply, and it is working as expected. I hope you would have found the video useful. Thanks for watching.